The Lakota people of the Great Plains have a rich history that is depicted in pictorial calendars known as winter counts. Oral and documented history has suggested around 1730 horses were introduced to Lakota bands by Cheyenne people. This introduction would soon change the way Lakota people would conduct hunting practices and warfare against the United States Calvary. Much like other cultural groups, early hunting practices in the plains consisted of stalking large and mid-sized game. The hunter would get close enough to the animal and kill it when the opportunity arose. After the horse was introduced, plains hunters would now have the capability to run at the same speed as the powerful buffalo and get close enough to shoot and kill this large game animal. The meat was used to supply the hunter and his family with food, the sinew for crafting and backing new bows, and the hide for tanning. It is said a great Lakota bow had the power and capability to pass completely through the animal as if there were little resistance. So what made the Lakota bow efficient at hunting practices and warfare against an increasingly powerful cavalry? Due to its high-stress design, narrowed tips, and sinew backing, the Lakota bow seems to outperform early prehistoric designs and examples throughout North America. In 2016, a group of bow makers and I decided to compare speeds between a common prehistoric design self-bow and the sinew-backed Lakota design. The prehistoric bow was heavier in draw weight, but both bows shot similar weighted arrows. Although the prehistoric profile was able to reach speeds 147 to 150 feet per second, the Lakota design outshot and outperformed the prehistoric profile by consistently reaching speeds around 162 to 166 feet per second. 11 years ago, I crafted my first bow, and that was with a friend and mentor who has unfortunately recently passed away, named Joe DeBill. I'll never forget the sense of accomplishment of crafting a primitive bow and shooting it over and over again. I'll cherish it. It was an amazing feeling, and I still have this bow today. It's made out of California baywood. It pulls 46 pounds at 25 inches of total draw length. It's a great bow. I still shoot it. I can definitely take it hunting and take large game such as mule deer or pronghorn in this area. Ever since, I've been experimenting and making different replications of Native American style bows throughout the Americas. This includes the complex Hoopa style bow, the Miwok profile, the Hidatsa bow, and many others, including the complex double curve design, the Lakota style bow. In this video, I want to take you step by step in making and producing the Lakota style bow. I'll first take you through the process of chasing a growth ring on the back of the stave, and then we'll proceed with some basic measurements. I'm Jeff with Primitive Lifeways, and let's get started. Now, chasing a growth ring on a hardwood stave like Osage orange is critical. You want to chase that throughout the entire length of the back of the bow. So this is the back of the bow. That's what's being established. What ends up happening is this back is under tremendous tension when you pull the string and launch the arrow. If that growth ring is nicked or damaged down to lower growth rings or even early wood, that creates a weak spot, and over time it will eventually break. The bow will break. So following a consistent single growth ring, once again throughout the entire length of the back of the bow, is important, and you can see that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So here we have the white sapwood. This sits directly below the bark, and then we have our heartwood, which is this darker yellow color, and in the heartwood we have late wood and early wood, late wood and early wood, and then late wood. So I am following this late wood ring, as you can see right here. When chasing this late wood ring on the surface, as you can see here, I use various tools. I use a draw knife for more aggressive work, a file for lighter work, and then finally a scraper as I start to near and approach this ring that I'm seeking. This ring is one of the wider rings on this stave, but it's still quite shallow, so I have to work very carefully. Okay, so I have one continuous growth ring followed on the entire length of the back of this stave. This is the side that faces the target or the object that I'm shooting at. Now I want to show you how to measure and lay out the Lakota Designs profile. This is a very easy and simplistic measurement system, and I'll show you how to do that right now. Typically speaking, the Lakota profile was a very short design bow, and following that short design, I decided to use a stave that measures 45 inches from tip to tip. So I'll take 45 and divide it by 2. 45 divided by 2 is 22.5. I find 22.5 on the back of this stave, make a mark, and draw a line across. From that center mark, I'll measure 2 inches. Once again, make an additional mark and draw a line across the back of the stave. And then on the other side, or the opposite side, I'll once again find 2 inches, make a mark, and draw a line. So I have my handle section. You can see I have that laid out. At this point, I want to create a center line on the back of this stave. So it's important to examine the grain. In my case, this grain runs nice and straight. This is a very clean stave. But if there's any snakiness to the limb, you want to make sure, once again, you follow that grain structure. If you cut through the grain, you're presenting problems, and as you tiller the bow and shoot it, it could splinter and break. So follow the grain. So I have my center line, and then I create horizontal marks. So every 2 inches from the handle, I measure out and I create horizontal marks all the way up the stave on both limbs until about 6 inches from this tip. Once you have your horizontal marks on both limbs, on both sides of the stave, I create vertical marks. Once again, the vertical marks are spaced every 2 inches, and I follow a measurement system of 1 1/4 inches. So I measure out 1 1/4 inches and make 2 marks. Once again, 1 1/4 inches, make 2 marks all the way up until, you guessed it, about 6 inches from the tip on both limbs. From there, it's as easy as connecting everything together following these vertical marks. So I'll just take the edge of my ruler and simply align that on the vertical marks and trace up. And same thing with this side. Now it's time to work on the tips. So we have our lines traced together. 1 1/4 inches is the total width of this bow. I find 6 inches and just make a horizontal line across the surface of the bow. I like narrowed tips. So from the center line, I measure 1/4 inch on each side and make a mark. So that creates a 1/2 inch tip. Following my mark, it's as simple as tracing the lines together from this vertical line that I left off with to the line that I just etched in. Just connect the two. Same thing with this side. Connecting the two lines, and then I'll flip the stave over and repeat the same pattern. Now if you look at some of the Lakota bows, you'll notice that the handle is pinched in on each side, and that's what I'm doing here. 1 1/4 inches is way too wide, so I like about 1 inch. I measure 1 inch across, and that's my total width. And from here, I don't really follow any measurement system. I just simply etch a line with a nice gentle curve, pinching in that handle, as you can see here. And that becomes my handle area. And here I have the measurements complete. So at this point, I'll take my draw knife and a rasp and follow these pencil marks, and then flip this stave over and start removing large amounts of mass on the belly side. Here is my Osage stave cut to shape. Everything's looking really good. There's a couple modifications that still need to be done. One involves the handle. I'll end up removing about 1/8 of an inch on each side. That will clean it up it'll feel a lot more ergonomic, and it'll also help it bend as I get into the final tiller of this bow. And then finally, I will clean up these tips. Right as they start to pinch in, they pinch in just a bit too abrupt, so I'll take my rasp on both sides of both tips, clean that up, get them a nice even transition, and that'll lighten up the tips too. So at this point, I'm going to start working on the belly side. There's some high spots, there's a couple low spots. I just want to even this up with my rasp, clean it up, and then reassess so we can get this onto the workbench. This stave is still quite thick. It is non-bending, so once I clean it up, we will take the draw knife and remove additional material. So we'll start that process right now. So I've been slowly floor tillering this bow for the past 2 weeks. It's finally starting to heat up in Arizona. It's now triple digits in central Arizona, and that means one thing: monsoon rains. It's great for this wood. In central Arizona, especially in higher elevations, it gets so dry that this wood quickly becomes brittle, and especially with the sinew backing, I want to make sure that the sinew dries nice and slow. I'm just adding that protective layer on the back to ensure strength on this back ring. This ring is a little bit thin. It's a really nice stave, but it's quite thin. So I want to just add strength. I'm not looking to get this long draw, just more stability. So I've got this bow bending nice and even by taking off even amounts of wood on both limbs throughout the handle. That's really important when floor tillering and going into the final tiller process. At this point, I want to make heat corrections to both of these limbs. So this limb right here, you can see it has a little bit of reflex. The handle's set back just slightly. You can see that there. But this limb, the opposite side, has more reflex. I want to even that up, set back this handle more, and push forward the limb that doesn't have as much reflex. So I'll do that right now by making heat corrections. I'll take you through that process. It's quite simplistic by boiling and steaming the wood. So what I'm doing right now is steaming this wood so I can put it into a form and set back the handle for my heat corrections. Right now in central Arizona, we're under severe fire restrictions. It's hot, it's dry, and it's windy. Humidity is about 5 to 7%. Typically speaking, I like to do this over open flame or a hotbed of coals. It speeds up the process, but I have to use what is legal and permitted during this time of the year. So I have my propane burner that's feeding flame to a pot of water. On top of the pot, I have my bow stave. The handle is right in the center, and covered over the top is tin foil. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm inducing moisture into the wood. I'm softening it and heating it up. Once it fully heats, I can put this into a form and set back the handle. It's quite a simplistic process. Now I took the bow out of the steamer, and at this point I'm setting back the handle. As you can see, I have this on the mold and I have the tips clamped down. So it's applying pressure to the handle area and it's pushing it back. So when I say pushing it back, when you're facing the belly side of the bow, which is this surface, you'll notice that the handle is set back as the limbs are actually set forward towards the target or the object. Now steaming isn't enough, so I take a heat gun, or if I'm doing this completely in a primitive setting, which I actually prefer, as we mentioned just a minute ago, I'll take dry heat and I'll run it over the area that I'm working. The reason you want to do that is because as you tiller the bow, just steaming can actually remove the heat corrections that you made. Dry heat will actually set it into place. So again, steaming softens the wood and it'll allow it to become more flexible without popping, but dry heat actually sets those corrections into place. So I'm simply going to run this heat gun right over this handle area. It's been a few hours. I let the bow sit on the mold to cool down. I just took it off, and this is what we're left with. We have a nice set back handle. Everything's looking really good. No cracks in the belly side. We are ready to move forward. So I have all my sinew processed. We are ready to laminate the back of this bow. Now, typically speaking with Osage Orange, I like a self bow, meaning no backing or lamination whatsoever. I notice it shoots harder and much faster, so it performs at its peak as a self bow. But again, we're dealing with a shallow growth ring. I do have a growth ring chased out. I want to reinforce that, keep things pushed down, held together, and that's where sinew comes in handy. So I'll take you through that process right now. When sinew backing a bow, the craftsperson should add all layers in one single session. I first cook animal hide glue with water and saturate the soft tendons in this solution. Each tendon is then pressed onto the back of the bow and staggered from tip to tip. Since this bow follows a single growth ring, only 2 layers are applied. So I removed the glue from this belly side of the bow, and we've actually been getting our monsoon rains stirring up as of recently, which is nice because I'll tell you, it's been hot out here, and the sinew can become brittle. So this moisture certainly does help. It keeps things flexible. So what I'm going to do is continue on tillering, and this is where I start to really slow down in getting both of these limbs to bend, and I'll start blending that into the handle. And I want this handle to flex just slightly. So I'll start off using the non-aggressive side of my Shinto rasp. There's an aggressive side and then a non-aggressive side, and I'm just removing small and equal amounts of wood on both limbs and blending that in to the handle. So you got to really be careful in this handle area. You do not want it to bend too much. So I'm just removing the wood, as you can see. I'm going slow. I'm not working fast. You do not want to rush this. Again, rushing creates hinges on the bow, and with the sinew bow, they can be very difficult to work out. One thing that I notice about a beginner when they're first making these complex sinew back bows is they originally want a 50 to 55 pound bow, but when things are all said and done, they finish tillering the bow and they shoot it, it's only 10 to 15 pounds, sometimes even less. The reason? Sinew adds a false weight. You might think it feels very stiff, which it does, but in reality it's not. So train the bow to bend. Keep this sinew working. Train it to be a bow once more, because this sinew, again, it's very deceptive. It might feel heavy, but in reality it's not. Removing equal amounts of wood stringing it heavy, constantly flexing the bow, and shooting it as you tiller it is quite important. So just a quick tip for anybody that's first getting into these sinew back bows. Work slow, but also string it when it feels heavier than a self bow. So as I continue floor tillering this bow, I figured I would work on these tips before I get too thin. And staying true to tradition, I'll narrow just this last 3.5 to 4 inches. And that will not only look aesthetically pleasing, but it will increase the performance. The narrower the tips, the faster the bow becomes. So I just use a half round file and I knock off these edges right down to these pencil lines. So I have these limbs moving really nice. They're starting to flex a lot more. At this point, I want to transition and I would feel more comfortable using a blade. So this is a sharp knife that I like to use for scraping the limbs. And I will do exactly that, removing equal amounts of mass on both sides, transitioning into the handle. The tips look nice and narrow. So that will certainly help the performance of this bow. So once again, I'm just removing equal amounts of wood. I'm scraping the wood instead of filing and rasping. At this moment, I like to slow down. There's no need to rush a sinew back bow. Okay, so I'm at a point where I need to string this bow. These limbs are moving right where I want them to be. I don't want to remove too much wood. And when I string this up at a low brace height, or even at a 4.5 inch brace height, that will show me exactly what areas I need to remove and what areas I need to avoid. So we'll get this thing strung right now. To string the bow, I use a leather pad that's safe for this tip, and it avoids contact with the ground where the sinew can start getting wet. And then I push on the handle with my right foot, and then I pull the upper limb towards my body while looping the string over and onto the nock. It's a pretty safe way to string the bow. Oh, it is strong still. Okay. This string is stretched out. And now we will take a look at where this bow is at. All right, so here's the bow strung at a somewhat low brace height. I would say this is about 3.5, 4 inches. And when looking at the bow, I'm seeing that this limb is a bit stiffer. It's bending pretty nice, but right in here, I don't want to remove material. This is bending a bit more. Out here is stiff. So you can see that this is also stiff right here. So I want to avoid this area and remove material on this side. Now with this limb, you can see I also marked an area which I want to avoid. So this area is bending more than this, right outside of the handle, and more than this area here. So the handle I won't touch. I'll just get this bending more, and then also this limb, while avoiding these two spots. Just a quick tip on how you can effectively tiller a single area on a bow without overstressing it too fast and quickly hinging that area. Use a measurement system. In this case, I'm using about a golf ball size worth of shavings, and I'll scrape enough material, like I said, to create about a golf ball size worth, and then I'll stop. I'll stress the bow and bend it to see if that area is moving. In this case, I can see it start to flex, but it's still quite stiff. I'll go back and scrape about a golf ball size worth more. So I'll continue that process, scraping, flexing the bow, seeing where it's at, and then scraping more. And I'll shrink that measurement system down. So I'll start off with a golf ball size, and then I'll go to a $1/2 or a 1/4. But once again, whatever measuring system works for you, just a quick useful tip on how you can effectively tiller a bow without removing too much too fast. Follow a measurement system. It'll force you to work slower. It's been a couple days of tillering and slowly removing wood using that measurement system. You can see where I'm at. Things are looking really good. I have it at full brace height and it's much more symmetrical. I can still see on this upper limb towards the midsection, it's working just a bit hard. Once again, in that center section, this can easily be fixed by removing material towards these tips. This bottom limb is still stiff. But the true test is to put this on a tillering stick or a pulley system to see what area is truly stiff and what area is bending too much. So we'll do that right now. Overall though, it's not looking bad. On the tillering stick, I can see right here is bending too much. This right in here is a little bit stiff, and I can see that's the area that I need to remove on this limb. Now on the opposite limb, I can see this area is bending really nice, and then right about here it starts to flatten out towards this tip. So this is the area that I want to remove wood at, and then I'll stop where that tip pinches in. We just took a look at this bow on a tillering stick, and there's definitely a couple areas that must be avoided and others that can use a bit more wood removal. So I'll start the process of slowly removing wood once more using my scraper. Now I am at about 15 inches of draw on this bow. I scraped the limbs more in those two areas. I'm still seeing right out here is a little bit stiff, but let's check it once more on the tillering stick. So we'll pull this now at 15 inches. Actually, the tied limb does not look too bad. I'm seeing an even bend. But what I'm seeing on this upper limb is, again, right in here is still a bit stiff on that looped limb. So I'll continue working that area and we can start shooting this in. I've been working on this bow and slowly scraping it. I'm now at 19 inches of draw. Everything's looking really good. That upper limb is starting to come around a lot better. So we're starting to balance this out where I feel comfortable just removing even amounts of material to get the draw length that's desired. But we're very close to our draw length. I want to show you a quick tip and trick you can do with a self bow as well as a sinew back bow, as long as your sinew and your reflex is induced evenly. So you'll see on this belly side we have growth rings, and you'll see that they're feathered out. So by feathering these growth rings, that is a rough guide of what you can go by to expect a good tiller. So right here on this lower limb, you'll see outside of the handle I have a growth ring. This is late wood, this is early wood. And then I have another feathered growth ring. So we have our early wood and then late wood. As we move down, we have once again another growth ring. We have a little bit of the early wood and then the late wood. This is just a rough guide in how to create a balanced tiller, but once again, this is not an exact science, and the reason no two bow staves are exactly alike. But generally speaking, with Osage Orange premium cuts, so meaning premium, good quality staves, when I have a nice elliptical tiller, I notice on both limbs, the growth rings are feathered out. After 6 months, this bow is finally complete. 54 pounds at 21 inches of draw. It's a very fast and hard-hitting bow. I've been shooting it off camera. And now I'll show you how well it performs. We'll take it down to the archery range before we put the final touches of artwork and decoration on this bow. Once the bow is shot over 100 times, decorations are applied by backing the bow with a rattlesnake skin. Adding more character and color to this bow, I then wrap the tips in sinew and the handle in red trade cloth with a thin strip of brain tan leather. The end result is a beautifully crafted Lakota style bow worthy of display and hunting large game with.